I was born on VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day, but only 2 years later. So my second birthday was probably the world's biggest party. And so I grew up in the afterglow of World War II, and everybody who'd ever been in the war was a real hero. I thought, wow, this is really cool. I want to be a war hero when I grow up. 2004 finally realized me. I think it was.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War in mass marches, rallies, and demonstrations. Central Park is the starting point for the parade to the UN building.
I was a little incensed that an awful lot of people in this country had a lot to say about the war in Southeast Asia. Everybody seemed like they had a stand to take on it. Or they seemed to know, they talked like they knew a lot about it, and not that many people had really gone over there and experienced it, and then came back and could tell what was right or wrong or good or bad about it. So I wanted to go. I was a volunteer.
When I was a young man going to grammar school, I was fascinated by airplanes. When all the other kids were collecting baseball cards and football cards, I was collecting airplane cards. My 8th grade teacher had us write an essay about what are our goals for our life. And I wrote at that time that I wanted to go in the military, learn to be a pilot, get out of the military and be an airline pilot. So it was pretty magical because what I wrote actually came to pass.
You know, the key was always, as far as I was concerned, whether or not you were a grunt down in the trenches or whether you could fly. That was my goal, was let's fly airplanes and keep it clean up there. Yeah, I had been drafted twice when I did finally finish college, and just before I finished, I went down to the Air Force recruiters and signed on the dotted line so that I was their property instead of the Army property.
In Vietnam, as we flew around, occasionally we'd see these really strange silver and dark blue helicopters. And we'd get closer and we could see very small letters on the airplanes, and it said Air America. So then we said, what's that? And somebody said, CIA. Oh, we don't want to do that. That's too scary. Really scary. We don't want to go fly for the CIA because they do spooky things. But what most people don't know, that there was a second secret little war going on in Laos, which had started way back in the late 50s and had escalated to the point where it was beginning to flare up to be quite a war. And as Vietnam flared up, so did Laos, because the Vietnamese were using the eastern edge of Laos as a supply road to supply their troops and the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. So the U.S. took it upon itself to support the local Royal Lao Army to engage the Vietnamese to divert some of them from supporting the South Vietnamese action that was going on there. Well, it escalated to the point where it looked like it was going to turn into another war. So all the powers that be got together and said, we don't want another war here. Let's make a pact. Let's agree to take all of our military out and just have advisors. So the next day, all of the guys who'd gone to work in their Marine Corps uniforms, the next day went to work in civilian clothes. Nothing changed except the uniforms and the agreement. So now all these advisors were now flying helicopters, and this evolved into a company called Air America. I'd actually gotten a telegram one day, and it said, if interested in employment in Southeast Asia, call this number. Since I needed a job, I called the number. And they were hiring age 34 pilots. So I got to fly the same helicopter that I flew in Vietnam and in training. My impression was that I was going to work for the CIA, even though it was vehemently denied everywhere that the Air America was CIA. It was pretty much understood. So anyway, we just flew around and delivered stuff. Basically, helicopters are airborne trucks, airborne taxis. Whatever you can't haul by truck or taxi, you call a helicopter. Up in the plain of Jars, it was like an actual battle line. There were the Pathet Lao, which are the bad guys, and there were the Royal Lao, which were the good guys. That was us. And we supported them, these proxy armies, fighting each other. And it was kind of like a chess game up there. Nobody ever really won, nobody ever really lost. It was pretty silly, actually. And also, what most people don't know is during this time, when the Vietnamese were overtaking the eastern side of Laos, they displaced about 300,000 villagers from the mountains of Laos. And those 300,000 people were refugees, and they had nowhere to go. So that our country took it upon itself to support those 300,000 people. So a vast majority of our work was supporting these people. We flew them food, we flew them rice, we took pigs, we took chickens, we took corn, we took buckets. Anything, anytime, anywhere was Air America's slogan, and by gosh, sometimes we did. And sometimes we had cargo that we just didn't ask what it was.
First assignment out of pilot training, of course everybody wanted to get a fighter, but there just weren't enough of them. And so I volunteered to be a FAC, a forward air controller, flying little observation aircraft, because that was my shot to go over to the war. I had been over there just about 6 months, and I told them I'd put in an official application, go to the Raven program. Nothing happened. I flew down to Fan Rang and I said, hey, what's going on with this Raven application? So I went over and I sat down, and he said, well, what do you know about the Raven program? No, the Steve Canyon program. So I told him everything I already knew about it. He said, you're not supposed to know all that. And I said, well, I do, and I'm ready to go. We were not really supposed to be there. There were no American military were allowed in Laos. People knew. And if they didn't, then we dressed for them so that they did, you know, whether it was blue jeans and a camouflage shirt or whether it was a black walking suit. We were pretty easily recognizable for our non-uniform. So they told us we worked for USAID, and we grew our hair long.
Oh yeah, we knew about the Ravens. They were ballsy, to use a phrase.
They thought we were nuts.
Everybody thought our job was scary, but we thought their job was geometrically, proportionally more scary than ours, because their job was to take little small airplanes like a Cessna 150, and they would go down and go out and fly low and slow over the jungle, looking for the enemy, trying to get the enemy to shoot at them so that they could then call artillery in. These guys had maximum amounts of power. They could rain death on the enemy just instantly from the sky. There were 103 of these Raven fellows during the war, and 28 of them were killed.
There were all sorts of stories floating around about us being mercenaries or some sort of high-paid civilians. I was a lieutenant. I looked at my records the other day. I was making almost $7,000 a year over there. I was a lieutenant.